Hello, friends, and welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast, where we focus on optimizing the well-being and best practices of insurance and financial professionals today. On this show, our objective is to help you optimize your life, optimize your profession, and learn from other optimized advisors. I'm your host, Scott Heinela. We hope you enjoy the show. Mr. Chris Fuller, welcome to the Optimized Advisor Podcast today. Thank you very much for taking the time with me this afternoon to enlighten the audience about you and RightPath, which we will certainly get into, and all the other things that you have going on in your life, in your world, and business. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Enlighten the group on who Mr. Chris Fuller is.
So, CEO of RightPath Resources. We're a technology company. We have a behavioral assessment, but we also have what happens after the behavioral assessment. So people utilize our assessment from everything from hiring and onboarding to leadership development and teaming succession planning. So I've done a lot over the years with professional development. I've got a couple of leadership books out. I've worked with teams all over the planet and worked with some of the top organizations in the world. We have 14 NFL teams that utilize our profile, and we have large companies, sophisticated companies from manufacturing all the way to some of the even mom and pops, the growing, scaling businesses that are even like mechanical, electrical, plumbing. So we're kind of all over the map, but really at the core, it's learning about people and elevating them to the best success that they could be for organizations. So for me, my heart is how do we elevate leadership that ultimately is going to elevate not only the organization, but also elevate the life and the quality of the employee base.
Thank you for that background and insight. So I met RightPath. Oh, Chris, you're going to tell me with this. It was your predecessor, which you're certainly welcome to talk a little bit about how you came to be with this, the journey, if you will. But this would have been in 2006 or 7 that I was introduced to it. And as a team, just as you described, really, we had an incredible workshop, and it was so impactful, which is how ultimately you and I met, because as we established our company and continuing to grow that company and really try to invest in ourselves as leaders, as managers, but really identify the uniqueness of each of us as team members is what I call them, and how to figure out and respect the differences. I think it's an important statement to make, which I'm sure you'll reiterate, is, many leaders don't really realize a person's natural wiring influences how they're going to operate within the workforce, how they're going to interact with employees, the other teammates, their customers, and ultimately be the, pun intended, optimize their position.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love it. And again, we all come to work with our own, they call it lens theory or gestalt theory, but you're wired a certain way. And, we say everyone's wired for greatness, just not in the same areas. But imagine us when we get into being able to dial into who you are exactly. That's really where, to your point, to my point, if we're throwing dad jokes out there, that they're on the right path. And for your jokes, that's where we optimize personnel is getting into that. So
we can ping pong those back and forth during the conversation. All right. So let's set the frame here. So our customer, our listeners are financial professionals and insurance licensed professionals. So your financial advisor, wealth manager, or insurance licensed professional, that's who our listener is here. At least that's who our target audience is. And so let me give you a framework of what many of those advisors' practices look like. Some of them are very small and intimate teams, family businesses, or a few hirees that would be independent. And the typical advisor is going like you and I, any entrepreneur, right? It's like we're going 150 miles an hour down the highway, trying to spin a bunch of plates, do a bunch of different things. And I recognize at some point along the way, I got to hire somebody because I'm just burning it at both ends and my business can support it. Now I hire somebody. What real due diligence did I do? Not only from like, can this person do the job, but are they going to completely disrupt the culture and be a toxic? Is this person even the right one for the position? So maybe in the framework of what I just described, where does RightPath potentially begin to help them in that journey? Because one of the biggest time sucks and waste of capital, time, energy, resources is hiring the wrong person or putting them in the wrong seat. And I might have misstated some things there. So help clean all that up for me.
No, I mean, it's a perfect conversation. So as you start to scale any entrepreneurial business, the sort of the science behind scaling a business is you've got the founder and the founder's mindset. And eventually that is going to lead to some level of success where it's got to get past the founder. And some of those first few hires are critical. And when you start to look at what is consuming you, you start to look at what can I delegate? And generally speaking, it's not going to be what's my secret sauce? What do I do amazing? Can I delegate that? You're probably going to be looking at what do I hate doing and how do I do less of that? So you're going to start to offload those particular tasks. But if you don't leverage our tool, you don't leverage the RightPath tool, then ultimately the person you're going to delegate that to, do they have the wiring? So, and people, I know it's going to be shocking to these guys, but people lie about their resumes. So not only do they have the resume for it, but do they have the wiring for it? So if I want somebody that's going to pick up some of the details that I'm dropping, or there's so much going on, then if I don't understand whether they are precise, organized, whether they are achieving or driven, what are some of those key critical characteristics? If I don't understand that, then I've got to try to intuit that. And that is only successful about, 50% of the time at best. And so we give you the insight to know if this is a natural strength for that particular job, that particular person. And we really don't say, don't use this as the hiring tool only. Use it as the interviewing tool. So if you have a detail-oriented job, you're going to want somebody that's on, from our profile, you're going to want somebody that is right side, precise and organized to be able to fill that role. Otherwise, you're going to be more frustrated because you're expecting them to pick up the details and yet you're having to clean that up. So we really, the average new hire, 48% of the average new hires fail in the first 18 months. And vast majority of it is because we're working an accidental hiring and onboarding, not an intentional hiring and onboarding.
And for most small businesses, which I would say most of the financial advisors, even those who work for a large firm, as you know, this like their individual practice, it's almost like a business within a business, right?
Yeah.
And so, you talk about one of the most disruptive things and costly, quote unquote, mistakes to make is either just completely hiring the incorrect person or having that person just in the wrong seat. So let's talk a little bit about now. And I will also say, we've not onboarded a team member to our firm without them conducting a RightPath assessment. So let's talk a little bit about the assessment, the breakdown between the 4 and 6 and how it gets more granular. And I'll say this, probably you wouldn't, is because people are more commonly aware of the DISC assessment. Sure. Fine. Good. To me, it doesn't get granular enough like RightPath. It's almost like it's at maybe not 10,000 foot overview, but it's 1,500 feet, whereas the 4 and 6 get down to sea level and also are much more applicable and specific to how this person is going to interact amongst other team members, amongst customers, and specifically what kind of a work environment is best suited for them.
Yeah. So when we put the profile was being created, it really was crafted in a number of different ways. And most psychological assessments, so most psychometrics, they're going to be based on a 4-factor psychology or 4-factor trait component. The issue with a 4-factor, and we have the Path 4 as a 4-factor. So when you have DISC or, some components of the Myers-Briggs, the INTJ, ENF, all those things, those are 4-factor assessments. And so ultimately what we're looking at is that that dominance, some level of that extroversion or interaction, some level of that harmony, versus challenging, some level of that structure versus unstructured. And so that's going to be the stereotypical of the four kind of buckets or components of this. The limitation of that is it actually stacks multiple traits in that can become a little bit more generic and not enough detail. So we have the path 4, which is going to be that high level that certainly you could compare to anything else on the market, predictive index, DISC, or any other 4-factor. But when we take it to the path 6, we pull out or separate some of the traits that you would lose if you were just going high level into path 4. For instance, I show up as somebody that wants a lot of control. I show up as somebody that wants more control than 95, 96, 97% of the population. But when you separate out my need for risk and adventure, that entrepreneurial aspect, I go to my score is a 51. So I go mid-level on my need for control. I don't need to be in control. But if we're not doing big things and if we're not doing big things fast, then yeah, I have to step in and do those. So for the RightPath assessment, the genius of it is we pull apart some of those factors that would get lost in that overview, and then we really go into the 16 micro behaviors under it. So for instance, on the dominance, again, in the 4, it includes adventure and risk and daring and that entrepreneurial aspect. In the 6, that's separated. And then we separate that out into 3 sets of micro behaviors. So if you're dominant, those 3 micro behaviors are you assertive, are you independent, and are you blunt? For somebody that's structured, are you precise, organized, and achieving? And so the detail of that gets into precisely what the role is, precisely what the job is, and we're able to create this 91 to 93% indicator of whether they're likely to succeed in that role or not. So the genius is in the detail of how granular can I get you? How well can I learn you at those deeper 16 micro behavior levels?
So can I'm just, again, thinking about our advisors as an example. When I think about them, can I put you on the hot seat of like some of the key profiles of what a specific position should quote unquote look like? Can we talk a little bit about that? Are you game?
Yeah, absolutely.
So like one of the first hires that an advisor would have as they're growing their business, and maybe it's 1A, 1B, or in no specific order, but it's definitely an executive assistant in some capacity, right? Somebody who's going to help do all those things with organize my time, efficiency, so on and so forth. The other one is somebody who can actually help manage the flow of business, what we call case management. So those would be like 2 initial, very important foundational pieces. Somebody who can help with the operations of me personally and the business, and then somebody who can actually manage flow of the business and client onboarding and things like that. Maybe we start with an executive assistant.
Both of them are going to be a great example. So the first piece that I'll go to is, what does the role do most often? So if I have a little term called DITLO, day in the life of. So on an average day, one of the first questions I'm going to ask is how much people interaction are they going to have? Because that is immediately going to say, okay, I need someone that is more extroverted or more reserved. And if I could just start with that client-facing interaction, are they going to be answering the phone? Are they going to be interfacing with some of the clients? So that's one of the first ones that I'm looking for. And if you're saying, no, this is a really important component that they are people-facing, well, then that immediately starts to dial in. We have 16 different profile types. And so that can immediately start to narrow this into maybe 6 profile types that have extroversion as a primary component. And so that's really one of the things that I'm looking for first. If they're interfacing with people all day long, they need to get energy from people. Otherwise, that client interaction can go sideways. So then the next one I'm probably looking for is going to be structure. But go ahead.
I was going to say, like, that's a person at the RightPath 4 level. It's like, that's somebody who's engaging.
Absolutely.
Yeah, got it. Yep, understand. Okay.
And you can be engaging and still be sort of what I would call an ambivert, right? You got introverts and extroverts, but there's this ambivert that is sort of in between that you can extrovert when you want, but you can also kind of pull back and, and work independently. So that's a big topic today is, the secret of the ambivert.
So that makes perfect sense. Some of our, we'll say like, the vice president of first impressions, right? Like that's somebody who is going to be very much out in the front, interacting with my prospects, my customers. This has got to be something who's good at communication, wants to interact with other people. What about, and I'm drawing a miss on the two, but somebody who's either going to challenge me or more on the harmonious side of do what I say kind of a thing. Where do you fall in that with an executive assistant?
So the interesting piece is I need to know you first, Scott. So when I look at your particular profile and I'm looking at yours and I'm going, okay, so Scott's an analyzer. And so, his detail orientation is more intense than right at 90% of the population. And you're highly independent. And so when I'm looking at those components, then who do you need on your team? Because they're going to need to work independently. And if they're too much, if you have to kind of interact with them too much, then it's almost going to feel like, how much are they really taking off my plate? So when you're looking at, for you personally, how much of that do you want them to push back? Or how much of it do you just want them to own and then kind of let this level of detail here? I'm owning it. Here's what I'm doing. And so I've got to know two things. Number one, I need to know you so I can help you hire better to your profile. And then we got to learn what's the great profile of an executive assistant. Because for me personally, I'm more of the fly high, fly fast, that entrepreneurial aspect. And so I need somebody to support me on a lot of the structure and the details so that I can get more work done. I need somebody that's willing to kind of own the structure side of it. So I'm actually willing for that person to challenge me more than maybe, another executive would, because I need that optimization of my time versus return. And so, that detail oriented is something I definitely need, but I'm willing to and actually enjoy the pushback potentially more than others would.
That's a hell of a point. And I think we need to double click on that. It's equally as important for said leader, right, to have taken the assessment to really do a proper self-assessment of their, I don't want to help me. It's not strengths and weaknesses. It's the wiring of who we are. And
yeah. I mean, I refer to it as strengths and situational struggles. So, for me, it's all strengths, right? It's like when people judge us about these weaknesses, it's like, we're just us. That's it. We're us. And so rather than trying to cookie cutter everybody, why don't you learn them and learn what comes natural? And this is, again, goes back to the Jim Collins right seat, right bust, from the early 2000s. When I learn you, then you don't have to try to act a way into that role. You are that way. And that's really where the genius comes in, around where you're 70, 80, 90% effective, because it's innate. It's built into you to do this and be this.
It's such a valuable point. I go back to who you are, which many of our advisors are. They're very entrepreneurial, right? They're independent, they're motivated, they're drivers, they're growing their business, they're type A's, many of them. But it's a very, very good point regarding an executive assistant, where if all I'm doing is coming up with all of these great ideas, right, and I lack execution, and I have a super harmonious EA, they're just going to be following all my orders. And where are we going to be in 1 year's time, 2 years' time? It's like we've started a bunch of things, but we're not executing. So the point of having awareness to then identify, I do need a person who's going to challenge me and keep me within the guardrails. Otherwise, we're going to end up all over the place. Not a good place to be.
No. And so the study that came out from Tasha Eurich, essentially people claim 90 to 95% of people claim to be self-aware. But after this study, only 10 to 15% of people are actually self-aware. Wow. And so we've got an 80% gap, an 80% delta that we think we know us. But when you get into the RightPath profile, And here's the other piece is then when I can show the executive assistant how to support you best, then that unlocks the genius of both of you. So how can you lead them best? How can they support you best? And just to know, if I'm throwing out ideas, you're probably going to have to push back on me, which my team does. That says that's a great idea. How are we going to do that in light of the other 7 other projects that you've already started this year? And so now it's capacity, it's capability. Are we going to do this sequentially or simultaneously? And so all those things, when we can build an office that embraces all of that and says at the end of the day, we want effectiveness, we want client satisfaction, then we can both partner with our own interactivity, ultimately to be able to deliver a 10x product based upon us and where we want to go with it.
Okay. Any other key points on the executive assistant position? I just want to stay on this path and then move on to the next step of the conversation.
Yeah. Again, one of the keys is to not to overmanage them. I mean, one of the keys is that first component is if you don't even have, for those of us that are entrepreneurs, we may need to hire somebody initially to come alongside us just to do task documentation and to kind of pull apart our business to go, okay, so what are you willing to let go of? What are you not willing to let go of? And then we can start to formulate a little bit more around what those handoffs are going to be. So I'm sure, Scott, you have the process already delineated down to the science of, these are the components of the process. So then understanding where those handoffs are back to the executive assistant or back to the ops manager, that's going to be those things where we have that clear rules of engagement for each other. And again, those components around the interaction, now that's where we come into a little bit more of that 16 factor, that substrate, those micro behaviors of, are we more collaborative or independent? Are we more blunt or diplomatic in our speech? Are we more reserved and quiet, or are we going to be much more enthusiastic and passionate and social and verbal? All of those things come into, it's one thing for them to do the task of it. It's another thing for them to do that interface or that inter-exchange that's going to be necessary. So we've got 2 aspects. Can they do the job from a task perspective? And then can they do the job from a people perspective? And then what's that going to look like in that comparison?
What do I want to look for in the profile? So many of these environments are going to be very fast paced. They're not overly structured. They don't have an extensive process and training protocol in many cases. It's like, have a hole, hire a person, here's the seat, go do the job. What kind of characteristic do I want to look at for that somebody who isn't just going to completely be like, I'm lost, I can't do this, I'm out?
So, much more of the introverted thinking, harmonious profiles, you might not want to look at those, the cautious thinkers, the deep thinkers, the detailists. So that might, if it's an aggressive sense of urgency, you're going to want to look for what we call the 3 A's or the drive component. So the drive component is how assertive, achieving, and ambitious are they? And so we're probably going to look at that, wanting that to be north of 50 so that they will own it a little bit more. In the micro behaviors, we're looking at things like the generalist is going to be able to kind of stay up and not get too bogged down into the perfectionism. The improv versus organized, we're going to need a balanced approach to where they can improvise and be agile, but they're not so improvisational that they're losing the structure and the organization. So we're kind of looking in for some of those key pieces, but you would certainly want somebody that's a little bit more on the independent side if they're going to work alone. Certainly somebody that has a little bit more of that risk profile, maybe mid to upper, to where they're going to pursue that a little bit deeper and faster. And again, otherwise they're going to want too much of I'm not sure that I'm making the right decision. I want to make sure. And so they'll be checking back with you a little bit too much. Probably not the greatest sense of urgency that you're looking for or that ownership aspect. The last one I would say is you're going to want somebody that if you go all the way down to the very last component in our 16, it's a component called resourceful. So you're probably really going to want somebody that is north of 55, 56 on resourceful.
And so it's interesting because those are very valid points, great takeaways. And then I transition to, okay, if I've got now, the executive assistant. I now need somebody that's capable of handling all the process flow of the business, the applications, which is just a very meticulous part of our business, but critically important. To me, these are somebody who's very process oriented, likes routine. They thrive in that, right? Like I know what I'm going to do every day. I don't have the stress and burden of that I got to call and prospect and do all of these things. So give us some insight as to what is some of the characteristic traits should look like for somebody who's going to be fantastic at just processing our business.
Yeah, I mean, those are going to be something like an analyzer profile. So the number one trait's probably going to be methodical. With methodical, they're probably going to be a little bit more introverted. And so that when they can work independently, work by themselves, and also have that structure, you're going to get that steadiness. And so, if they're too high on the structure and the analyze, that's where you can get into a little bit of that perfectionism. But certainly you're going to want to have somebody, you're not going to want somebody who's an extrovert improviser in the role, because they're going to be, wanting to talk to people and trying to change it up all the time. And they're going to be dropping details. So certainly you're looking for more on the introvert side and more on the methodical and structured side, because they're actually going to get energy. And, you and I have talked about this before, but a lot of it is about energy management. And because if you have to do something all day, every day that just drains the life out of you, you're going to do it worse. And ultimately, it's going to impact your engagement in what you do. So when you find somebody that needs to work on their own and work a very delineated process, we certainly are going to look for some of those introversion traits and certainly some of those analyzer traits, methodical, structured components to go with it.
Okay. This is just the beginning of the journey. And what I mean by that is the self-assessment, the RightPath assessment is just the beginning. Beyond that, you work with organizations, whether it be entire sales teams, the entire administrative team. Another thing that we really love about what your technology does in alignment with the coaching and consulting that you do is, for example, let's say I've got a team of 12, 15 people. You'll overlay all of that and put together a profile. Just talk a little bit about what the next steps would be in the relationship and involvement that you have.
Yeah, love that part. So, people go, okay, well, you need this assessment. Well, the assessment is just the beginning. And extrapolated from that is just like, all right, so now all of us have taken this assessment. So what? Well, the so what is now, Scott, I can put my profile against yours. So we do comparison reports. So that 1-to-1, if you're onboarding a new team member, you can get to know them faster and know exactly how to do that. We've kind of been talking about that the last few minutes. But when you start to map the entire team, and we start with the team reports, then really you're able to see what the tendencies of the collective are. So we've got some that are a little bit more blunt, some that are a little bit more diplomatic, some that are greater at details, some that aren't. And so all of this comes into what does the team dynamic, because that culture and the interaction, we just assume great teams happen, and great teams do not just happen. It is intentional. It is purposeful in what they do. And ultimately, when you can sit there and look at, oh, this is why this happens. That was one of the things that I had a client that said, let me tell you about my team. And I said, well, stop. Let me just have everybody take the RightPath profile and let me tell you about your team. And they were just kind of blown away by, how do you know this? Right. So that's it. When we look at all the behavioral traits, and we put the team in a grid. So we'll put them in a grid on a graph. And the X and Y axes are those that are more fast to start and those that need much more planning, perfection, lining it out. And then those that are more results oriented versus relationship oriented. And by the time that you graph your entire team, or one of the things that we did for you and your team, we have that session where it live in person and we're doing that human data chain, if you remember, and everybody's kind of lining up next to their scores. We can really see real time where the interactions have been and ultimately kind of how that goes. So the struggle with teams is if we don't understand the conflict or don't understand the interaction, we personalize it. And one of my key pieces is I want to externalize it and explain it, as opposed to people personalizing it and judging the team itself, or we're broken. You're not broken. You're wired this way. So when you can see it, and when you can see it with data, we can see it live with graphs. That to me is, one of those key pieces. It explains team dynamics in one quick piece. So that's for the team. Then for the leader, it tells you how to lead everybody uniquely, because we don't lead, one size fits all. Every different team member has different needs, different wants. And so to be able to have that dashboard, if you will, of everybody on your team, just gets you there that much faster, that much better, so you can contour that communication.
It's been a very, very helpful tool and resource for us. And going back to the retreat that we had that you were involved with, it was very interesting because we knew, of the group, you're generally like this, but to really hone in on it, it really helps to clear out any fogginess, if you will, and really create crystal clarity. And then, of course, we identified the one real outlier of the group.
Yeah.
And I think that was also very helpful to give that perspective as a team, and some of those conversations that we had the opportunity to have that we probably wouldn't have. So, as I go on from that, what is, from your perspective, what's the optimal journey and some of the outcomes that you've seen as a case study, for you and firms or relationships that have worked with you?
One of the first pieces is, we were working with a major organization that delivers very expensive equipment to billionaires. And they were struggling. So it was an engineering team, and they were struggling. And it's just like, we have got to get this together. We're struggling. And after I profiled everybody and we put the entire graphs up around the room, we called out that everybody in the room was analyzing each other. And they're introverts. And so what felt like this skepticism, what felt like this, we don't get along, was really, once we explained the wiring and we could put us against it. So at the end of the day, these engineering drawings had to get done so that they can move into final manufacturing phase. Once we did that, everybody had an aha moment, and they were able to then say, all right, so this is it. We're wired to be skeptical or to double think. So now I'm going to put in, this off ramp, so that if we seem to get a little bit too molecular for the sake ultimately of customer satisfaction, here's how we're going to do that. So we put some game plans in place around that team. And another executive team, they're like, Chris, we're broken. You got to come in and help us. Profiled the entire team, and the complaints were, we don't talk to each other. We're siloed. The organization is feeling it. The number one trait of the 12 executives on this team was independence. So it wasn't that they were shutting each other out. They just didn't even think about the impact to the other departments that were going on that piece. So
right.
Those are two that immediately come to mind around the impact, because we were able to, once you understand the wiring, and it's not me against you, it's just, this is how we're wired. Now we can make a plan.
Those are all very, very good points. Okay, last but certainly not least, let's talk a little bit about some of the books you've authored, what you've experienced in that. Maybe you could share a little bit about what inspired you to author those, maybe some challenges you had with those. And then last but not least, how do we engage with Chris Fuller and RightPath?
That's awesome.
So let's talk about the books first.
Yeah. Well, you can tell, like, I can kind of geek out on the science of it, and I can kind of talk about, like, Scott is, more detail oriented, than 90% of the population. He's more standard practice than 92%. So I can geek out on the science because it's contextual. But the overarching piece is, okay, so who cares? Like, what do we do with it? And I believe that life is an adventure to be lived, embraced, not endured. And so I take that to heart. As you can see over my shoulder here, I went to Nome, Alaska, and learned to mush dogs. So what I love doing is I love talking about some of these deep concepts of entrepreneurialism and business and teaming and all of that. But I love wrapping it in a story. I think for eons, we learn through the story. And I think we learn more impactfully through the story. So going up to Nome, Alaska, what I loved about that journey and ultimately what became that first book of Iditarod leadership was the story itself is about purpose. So I'm a big person of purpose. I believe that we were, born on purpose, for purpose. And so when you're chasing that purpose, it's so much more. There's so many people that get zombified, if you will. They show up every day, rinse, wash, repeat, and they just become zombies in the workforce. And for me, I'm looking to re-enliven. I want to live our best, most empowered life, and that comes out of passion, not paycheck. So for me, what I love about it, the purpose of the race is in the 1920s, there was a remote village in Nome that was dying from diphtheria, and the medicine could not get to this village. It was dead of winter, 1920s. And so there were a group of 6 mushers that said, if you will give us that serum, if you'll give us that medicine, we'll put it on our dog sleds and we'll get it to Nome and save that village. And they got it there within 6 days and saved the village. So I love that courageousness. I love ultimately that the commemorative race now was a medical mission of mercy where engaged people said, not on my watch. And so ultimately they sacrificed themselves, led, team, did all those things for the sake of a very significant outcome. So especially like with you guys, what you guys do ultimately with everything that you do and the ability and the service that you do to families and legacies and all of that, generational wealth, everything that you guys do and work on, that meaningful piece, that's the journey. So I love telling the story about the Iditarod, and it's an extended journey. It's 1,100 miles. So if you can imagine taking 16 dogs, you've got to pair dogs up. So that's why I love telling the story about, some of these personality behaviorals. You put the wrong 2 dogs together, and man, you're not doing this, you're doing this. And so, but what I love about it is it's more of a servant leader model, a collaborative leadership model, where if you as a leader aren't feeding and nurturing and growing and grooming the people on your team, there's no reason for those dogs to run. They love running and they love pulling. They're bred for it. But why would they run for you? And especially if you leave them malnourished, and especially if you neglect them or treat them poorly, why would they run for you? And so, this is just a tie back. And the last piece on this that I talk about is how do you get 1,100 miles? Well, there's 26 cabins between Anchorage and Nome. So anytime you're feeling stress, it's too big. You got to break it down into subcomponents. So we teach a little bit of that mile marker methodology so that we can kind of break it up and cut it up. So love telling the story about how we achieve big things on purpose with the team in that servant leadership style. So that was kind of my first piece around how do I go live an adventure? And then how do I utilize that to tell a story that ultimately is going to impact people and impact teams?
That's great.
Yeah. But the second book was called Inspire. So this is the last one out, Inspired Leadership. And so it's an acrostic. It's an acronym where we talk about, the IN of Inspired is you've got to be intentional. The S is you've got to live in service of others. The P is passion and purpose. The I is, so I've got both sides. I've got the people side of me, and then I've got the business side of me. So the business side is we've got to be intentional. We've got to integrate. We've got to execute with excellence, and we've got to develop every single day. But the people side of me is we need to be in service of others, operating with passion and purpose, and we need to be real in our relationships. And so when you marry those two together, that's really that inspired model to be intentional, serving others with passion and purpose, integrating our operations fully, real in our relationships, executing with excellence. And then again, we're not staying there. We're diligently developing every single day. So all the different things that I do and the little craziness that I do, I helicoptered into base camp at Everest, learning to sail and doing those things, 10K on the Great Wall of China, tracking animals in Africa with guides. All of that comes into me being able to tell the story about, I can use that metaphor to talk to teams about what is going on in their business and then how they can, through that story, they can learn the lessons without me putting them to sleep.
That's fantastic. So, all right, you just told a couple ways that individuals can get in touch with you. Author of 2 books, they can find the books. A specific, yes, I know LinkedIn and Google, all that, but like specifically, if you're going to say great place to start in terms of engagement and connecting with you, where would they start?
Yeah, certainly you can just send an email to contact@rightpath.com. My entire team will pick that up and say, hey, I got a need. Can we jump on a Zoom? Can I tell you a little bit more about my story specifically so we can look at that? But a lot of organizations will start with, hey, we're going to have this particular meeting. Can we bring you in for either a keynote, half day, full day? And so we'll do the RightPath and we'll go through all of this as sort of an energized component to get us going. But again, all of that for your specific needs, you send an email to contact@rightpath.com. You can certainly get us there. Right in the middle of redoing the website, but rightpath.com, RightPath, rightpath.com will get you to our website as it is now before we revamp that one. And so, but otherwise it is, we really don't want to do anything cookie cutter. We have some of the generic components, but if I don't know you, I don't know your team, and I don't know the situation, I just get concerned that I can't make the greatest impact for you. Mm-hmm. So 100% reach out and let's have a conversation about those components.
I love it. Thank you for your time. We love RightPath. It's been a very helpful tool for us and our company, and as we continue to work together as a team, integrate, but also grow our team. So thank you for everything, and thank you to RightPath. I strongly encourage everybody who is listening, if you've got a practice with existing employees looking to hire somebody, you should engage. So with that said, again, Chris Fuller, RightPath, thank you for taking the time. Cheers. Till next time.
Scott, thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. Please subscribe, like, share, leave a comment or review. Be sure to check us out on social media at Optimized Advisor Podcast. Till next time.